Have you ever felt like you're just, well, bad at math?
Oh, I think everyone knows that exact feeling.
Right, like you're sitting at a table, you're trying to split a dinner bill with friends,
Right.
or maybe you're just staring at a spreadsheet at work and suddenly your brain just it freezes up.
Yeah, the fog rolls in.
Yeah, exactly. A
Yeah.
total fog. And it's this incredibly common anxiety.
Hmm.
But what if I told you that for millions of people, that deeply internalized feeling of being bad at math wasn't some inherent personal failing at all?
Which is how we usually think about it, right?
Totally. We blame ourselves.
Yeah.
But what if it was actually the result of a completely preventable systemic glitch? A glitch that usually happens right around the fourth or fifth grade.
It really fundamentally reframes how we look at academic struggle, doesn't it? Because, like you said, we are so conditioned to internalize those moments as personal deficits.
Yeah.
This whole idea that our brains just aren't wired for numbers. But the source material we're digging into today suggests that we are looking at the wrong culprit entirely. We shouldn't be diagnosing the student. We really should be diagnosing the system itself.
So true. And today, we are taking a deep dive into a really provocative document. It's titled The Multiplication Manifesto, a call to restore teacher-led innovation in mathematics.
It's a heavy title.
It is. And just a quick heads up for you listening, this document throws some very heavy punches. I mean, it goes after the educational establishment, the big curriculum publishers, institutional leadership, all of it.
Yeah, it does not hold back.
Not at all. So we just want to say right up front, we aren't here to take sides or, endorse politics or anything like that. We're simply here to impartially unpack why the author thinks the system is broken and just examine the fascinating claims they're making.
Right. Because whether you agree with all of it or not, the core issue is undeniable.
Exactly. And the mission of our deep dive today is to explore this recognized, serious shortcoming in the U.S. educational system. Specifically, the failure of a massive segment of the student population to master basic multiplication at grade level.
Which is a huge problem.
A massive problem. But the real mystery here, the thing that makes this so compelling, is why an efficient, proven, teacher-designed solution to this exact problem is apparently being completely ignored by the establishment.
Yeah, the author is really mapping out a massive disconnect here. The goal of the manifesto is to bridge the daily, granular realities of a fourth grade classroom with the massive, slow-moving gears of institutional bureaucracy.
Right.
It is a brilliant look at how massive systems respond to innovation, or I guess more accurately, how they actively insulate themselves against it.
Okay, so let's start with the gravity of the problem itself, because the author doesn't frame this as just a minor hiccup. It's framed as a devastating turning point in a child's life.
A permanent roadblock, essentially.
Yeah. For millions of kids, the inability to recall basic multiplication facts, like instantly knowing that 7 times 8 is 56, that is where the wheels completely fall off.
The manifesto actually calls multiplication fluency the foundation of mathematical power.
Which sounds intense, but wait, I'm stuck on this right out of the gate. Because when I was in school, they just made us do those mad minute worksheets.
Oh, the timed drills.
Yes, until we practically cried. Or they say that was the right approach? Because I thought modern math education was all about, deep conceptual understanding.
Right, the concepts over the memorization.
Exactly, not just spouting off facts like a human calculator. Doesn't focusing on speed kind of take away from actually understanding what multiplication is?
See, that is the exact tension at the heart of this entire issue. And the manifesto has a very specific answer for it.
Okay.
It argues that framing this as a battle between rote memorization on one side and conceptual understanding on the other, it's a false dichotomy. And it actually harms students. Because it all comes down to the mechanics of human cognition, specifically cognitive load.
Right.
Working memory is incredibly limited. We can really only hold on to a few pieces of active information at any given time.
Okay, so think of it kind of like the RAM in your computer. Like if you have too many tabs open in your browser, the whole system just slows to a crawl and eventually crashes.
That's a perfect way to look at it, yes. So think about a student trying to learn long division. Or maybe how to find a common denominator to add complex fractions.
Those fractions.
Right. Those are multi-step, conceptually demanding processes. If that student cannot automatically recall that 6 times 7 is 42.
Like if they don't just know it instantly.
Exactly. If they have to pause, hold the big division problem in their short-term memory, drop down to counting on their fingers, or, silently add 7 6 times in their head.
Oh, I see.
They've completely lost the thread of the new lesson. The actual new concept of division just bounces right off them.
Because their mental bandwidth is entirely consumed by just a basic calculation.
Oh, wow. So they aren't failing long division because they don't understand division.
No.
They're failing it because the hidden cost of figuring out 6 times 7 just completely bankrupted their brain for that moment. And that failure compounds daily. The lack of automatic fluency acts as this permanent bottleneck.
That makes so much sense.
Fractions become an impossible wall of confusion. Algebra, which requires manipulating multiple variables simultaneously, completely collapses.
Right, because algebra is basically all cognitive load.
Exactly. And what happens to the student in that moment, they look around, they see other kids getting it, and they just decide, well, I'm just bad at math.
Wow.
The Manifesto calls this a silent crisis because teachers can measure it. They can predict exactly when the student will hit the wall.
And yet nothing stops it.
Right. Students are continuously pushed into upper elementary and middle school without this foundational fluency.
Which brings us to kind of the craziest part of this whole document. If this is a known, measurable crisis that literally stops kids in their tracks, what's being done about it?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because according to the Manifesto, we don't need some billion-dollar research grant to fix it. A grassroots solution already exists.
It does.
A teacher actually built, tested, and refined a system that fixes these exact deficits quickly and permanently. And it does it with, quote, grace, humor, and rigor.
Which is entirely different from the exhausting, terror-inducing rote memorization of the past that you were talking about.
The mad minutes.
Right. The system detailed in the source material is pattern-based, it's cumulative, and it's deeply criterion-driven. It bridges that gap between understanding the concept and getting the automatic recall.
Okay, I really want to understand the mechanics of this. How does it actually work in the room? Because the document mentions unlocking whole tables at once using vivid patterns. What does that actually look like for a 9-year-old?
Well, it does not start by handing them a grid of 100 numbers and telling them to memorize it. It starts with logic. It relies on showing students the underlying architecture of the numbers first.
Okay.
For example, the zeros and ones are taught as overarching rules, not individual facts to memorize.
Because anything times 0 is 0 and anything times 1 is itself.
Exactly. And the tens are just the base number with a 0 attached. So right there, once those simple patterns are established, a huge chunk of the multiplication table is already handled.
Oh, that's true. You've knocked out like a third of it immediately.
Right. Then the method introduces the concept of commutativity.
Commutativity, right. Meaning the order of the numbers doesn't change the final product. So 3 times 4 is the exact same thing as 4 times 3.
Yes.
Wait, so commutativity is basically a mathematical buy one, get one free sale.
I love that.
If I put in the work to learn that 6 times 8 is 48, I automatically get 8 times 6 entirely for free. Half the workload instantly vanishes.
Imagine the psychological relief for a struggling student when they realize that.
Seriously.
The mountain they thought they had to climb is suddenly half as high. From there, the system tackles the remaining facts, the 2s through the 9s, using specific daily routines.
What kind of routines?
It incorporates songs, flashcards, oral games, and timed quizzes.
See, there's that word again. Timed quizzes. That sounds a lot like the high-stress drills. How is this actually different?
The difference lies in what happens after mastery and how mastery is actually defined by the teacher.
Okay.
Progression in the system requires real, undeniable fluency. That means fast, error-free recall. You don't just move on to the next set of numbers because it's Friday and the syllabus says it's time to move on.
Oh, wow.
That is the criterion-driven aspect. But here is the brilliant part. Once that automatic recall is achieved, the learning devices intentionally fade away.
The fading. Yes, I found that part of the manifesto fascinating. It's like training wheels on a bike.
Exactly.
You don't ride with them forever. You use them just long enough to feel the balance.
Yeah.
And you take them off so you can actually, ride.
Precisely. A song or a rhyme is a really great hook to capture the memory initially. But if a high schooler still has to sing a song in their head to figure out what 8 times 7 is...
They aren't truly fluent.
Right. They aren't fluent. The method uses these engaging tools to build the neural pathway, but then it relies on repetition and speed to turn that pathway into an instant reflex.
Wow.
It builds true number sense rather than just rote fatigue, so the student can eventually think and compute simultaneously.
And what really stands out to me is that this method demands commitment and fidelity from the teacher in the room. Like it requires a professional educator paying close attention to which kids have mastered the sevens and which kids need another day.
Right. It relies on the teacher's judgment.
Exactly. What it doesn't demand is highly expensive software licenses, flashy textbooks, or some corporate consultant.
Which leads us directly into the central conflict of the text.
Yeah, because if we have a method that is incredibly effective, it builds deep number sense, it saves kids from a lifetime of math anxiety, and it doesn't cost a fortune to implement.
Why is it being ignored?
Why on earth is it being ignored? The author claims that breakthroughs like this continually, quote, vanish into the void of institutional indifference. Why does that happen?
The author introduces a concept they call the bureaucracy's paradox. And the argument here is really sharp. It says the education establishment lacks courage, not intellect. Everyone at the district office or the publishing house says they want systems change, but almost no one actually wants to disrupt bureaucratic comfort.
So they want the appearance of change without the friction of change.
Exactly.
The manifesto is absolutely brutal on this point. It says district leaders and educational foundations want cosmetic solutions that fit neatly into spreadsheets, grant applications, and conference lingo.
Yes.
It argues they seek programs, not paradigms, scripts, not strategies, deliverables, not discoveries.
It's a great line. And to explain exactly how a proven teacher-led solution gets crushed by this indifference, the author outlines 4 specific forces of inertia.
Okay.
And when you look at these 4 forces together, you really start to understand the sheer momentum of the status quo.
Right. So if this method is so cheap and effective, publishers must absolutely hate it, right? I mean, they can't sell a massive district-wide textbook package for millions of dollars if the secret to math fluency is just a really solid underlying teaching strategy.
That observation covers the first 2 forces perfectly.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The first is that the market prefers things that are easily distributed. True reform demands new habits. A teacher has to change how they interact with the classroom, how they assess fluency, how they manage their time.
Right, you can't just buy that.
Exactly. That is hard to package into a box. The educational market wants easy printouts and worksheets.
And the second force?
The second trap is separating the materials from the methods. This happens when a publisher actually does notice a successful grassroots method.
Wait, how does that happen? Do they just steal the idea and water it down?
Essentially, yes. A publisher will look at a vibrant, successful classroom. They'll see the teacher using specific tools, maybe a set of counting blocks or what educators call manipulatives.
Which are just like physical objects kids use to model math problems, right?
Right. So the publisher will manufacture those physical manipulatives, box them up, and sell them to a district across the country. But they strip away the nuanced underlying pedagogy that actually made those blocks effective in the first place.
Oh, that's terrible.
They sell the shiny tool, but they lose the soul of the instruction.
So a school district buys a huge pallet of expensive counting beads. They hand them to teachers without the proper training, and then everyone wonders why the test scores didn't go up.
Exactly. It's frustrating.
It's wild.
Yeah.
And then there's the whiplash of educational trends. It's crazy how often education swings between extremes, throwing out proven methods just because they don't fit the current vibe of the decade.
That's the third force, the trend cycle. It's a massive barrier to continuity. If a proven, rigorous method of multiplication seems too traditional during a wave of progressive inquiry-based reform, it just gets tossed out. And a decade later, when the pendulum swings back toward traditional direct instruction, the progressive methods get thrown away. The system rarely pauses to ask, does this actually help a 9-year-old learn to multiply?
They just ask if it fits the fashion.
Exactly. Does this fit the current philosophical fashion?
Which brings us to the final force, and honestly, this is the one that made my jaw drop, the system's fear of teacher dependence.
Yes.
The manifesto argues that the bureaucracy actively prefers teacher-proof programs over anything that requires a real human being to use moment-to-moment professional judgment.
The term teacher-proof is chilling when you really analyze what it means.
It really is.
It refers to a highly scripted curriculum where the manual literally tells the teacher what to say, what to point at, and exactly how many minutes to spend on each slide.
Unbelievable.
The institutional bureaucracy loves these programs because they are perfectly predictable. They guarantee standardization across hundreds of classrooms.
But wait, creating a teacher-proof curriculum? I mean, that sounds to me like trying to run a 5-star restaurant, but forcing the kitchen to serve frozen microwave dinners just so nobody messes up the recipe.
That's a fantastic analogy.
You are completely eliminating the skill, the art, and the responsiveness of the actual professional standing in the room. If a kid needs an extra 5 minutes to understand the 8 times tables, the teacher-proof script says, "Sorry, time's up. Move to the next slide."
And that is the absolute pinnacle of the bureaucracy's paradox. The institution publicly praises teaching excellence, yet they actively design structures that prevent excellence from occurring.
Yeah.
They want the results of a master chef, but they design a kitchen that only allows a microwave to be plugged in.
Oh, that's perfectly said.
They maintain systems that signal they care about student outcomes without ever having to tolerate the messy, unpredictable, systemic disruption that real, localized innovation actually requires.
It's a system designed to protect itself, not to educate the student. So, where do we go from here? If the system is trapped in this paradox, paralyzed by trend cycles and just terrified of its own teachers, what is the manifesto's vision for actually fixing it?
Well, the path forward outlined in the text requires a fundamental shift in trust. First, it demands that we reject the idea that innovation only trickles down from elite think tanks, massive publishing conglomerates, or, grant-funded academic pilots.
Because the real revolution in this story came from a creative, resourceful teacher who was actually standing in front of 30 kids every day.
Exactly. The vision is to empower local educators to propose and test homegrown solutions. The system needs to build formal, respected pathways for these teacher-developed interventions to actually be adopted at scale.
Right.
If a teacher in one school figures out a brilliant way to achieve 100% multiplication fluency, the district shouldn't ignore it just because it didn't come in a shrink-wrapped box.
The author also calls for replacing calendar-based pacing with mastery-based progression, which completely shifts the goalposts.
It does.
Because calendar-based pacing, it feels like a train leaving the station just because the clock struck 3.000, regardless of whether the passengers have actually boarded. Like, sorry, kids, we spent 3 days on the 7s. We are moving to the 8s on Monday, ready or not.
And that rigid adherence to the calendar is exactly what creates the cognitive bottleneck we discussed earlier.
Right.
Mastery-based progression means you do not move the train until you verify that everyone is safely on board. It requires data-driven fidelity. The manifesto argues that multiplication fluency must be an absolutely non-negotiable benchmark in early mathematics.
You can't just skip it.
No. You cannot paper over the gaps and just hope they figure it out in middle school.
And to tie it all together, the manifesto connects this really granular classroom issue directly to the broader cultural conversation about equity. It states, very boldly, that fluency is equity in action.
It is a profound critique of how institutions use buzzwords. The author is essentially saying that all the high-level aspirational talk about educational equity, inquiry-based learning, and preparing diverse populations for STEM futures, it's entirely hollow if those same institutions are failing to teach those children basic numeracy.
Wow. Yeah, you cannot promise a kid a bright future in a high-tech engineering field. If your system failed to teach them 7 times 8, pass them along anyway, and then quietly let them believe they were just naturally bad at math.
No.
That is the literal opposite of equity.
The overarching charge of the document is a demand to return autonomy and trust to the professional educator. If we genuinely want a generation of students who can think mathematically, the rallying cry has to shift away from top-down innovation at scale delivered by corporate publishers. It needs to become, let teachers lead and let proven methods prevail.
It really is a powerful reframing of the whole educational landscape.
Yeah.
So to kind of recap the journey we've been on today for you listening, we started by looking at a devastating yet completely preventable foundational collapse.
Right.
That specific moment, a student misses the multiplication benchmark, their working memory maxes out trying to do basic addition during an algebra lesson, and they permanently decide they're just not a math person.
And from there, we explored the mechanics of a real grassroots alternative. A brilliant pattern-based solution that relies on logic like the Bergo sale of commutativity and carefully fades its learning tools to build true, effortless number sense.
But then we slammed right into the bureaucracy. A rigid, fearful establishment that ignores these grassroots solutions because they don't fit into an easy spreadsheet. A system that actively seeks to teacher-proof its classrooms in favor of cosmetic fixes and publisher-mandated pacing guides.
Yeah.
It is a wildly fascinating look at how institutional inertia can block actual life-changing success.
It really is. And as we wrap up our analysis of this manifesto, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, extending the logic the author presents today.
Okay, let's hear it.
We have spent this entire deep dive talking about mathematics. But if the educational bureaucracy actively suppresses highly effective, proven math methods simply because they rely on the skill and judgment of a teacher rather than a teacher-proof
Yeah.
script, what other vital foundational skills might be suffering from that exact same administrative fear?
Oh, that's a chilling thought.
Right. Think about subjects that require even more nuance. Could widespread struggles with reading comprehension be the result of districts forcing scripted one-size-fits-all phonics programs over a trained educator's targeted intervention?
Wow.
What about creative writing? Are we stifling a generation's ability to communicate because bureaucracies are terrified of trusting an English teacher to teach foundational mechanics without a rigid pacing guide telling them what page to be on by Tuesday?
It makes you wonder.
If the bureaucracy's paradox is real, if institutions inherently fear the unscripted excellence of their own professionals, it almost certainly does not stop at the door of the math department.
That is an incredibly thought-provoking question to walk away with, and it really changes how you look at the entire system. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the structures around you, keep looking for those mysteries hiding in plain sight, and we will catch you next time.